How many times in our lives have we yelled out, "Stop," or "Look out," maybe to our children, maybe to some friends as they were about to do something dangerous? How often did, when we heard that or when we said it, they averted a kind of injury or an accident that might have happened? You and I need warnings in so many ways, and certainly warnings are part of the prophetic mission of Christ and his church. We all know of the fragile human condition. We all know how each of us is prone to sin. We all know how we can easily be mistaken. And so we need warnings and correction. And certainly our readings speak of this to us today. The Lord says to Ezekiel in the first reading that he must warn the people and educate them in the ways of God, and that if a prophet does not speak out to dissuade the wicked from his way, the wicked shall die for his guilt, but that God will hold the prophet responsible for his death. Indeed, it's a compelling warning to Ezekiel, this prophet charged with the mission of speaking to God's people. But it's one that in varying degrees and expressions applies to each and every one of us. And I think that's the message of at least the first part of our gospel today. Now God is not speaking to this one prophet, but to all of his disciples. And his message is the same. If someone sins against us, we are then responsible to tell our brother and sister of that sin. Jesus specifically calls them, and through them all of us, to prudence and respect and charity in doing that. He tells us to speak to the other alone and in private. He then urges his disciples to engage in a kind of disciplinary procedure, not for purposes of punishment or vengeance, but again for correction, to help the other see their error and sin. And sadly, this seems to be something that all of us shy away from too easily. We don't want to confront anybody. We don't want to be accused of being harsh or intolerant. And so we remain silent. And then growth in relationships can be stunted as dysfunction in so many ways is simply perpetuated. The solution to all this, of course, is summed up in the passage from our second reading from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. For the one who loves has fulfilled the law. All of us know that love, this great experience, can be so demanding. And so we ask ourselves, how is it loving to be silent when one whom we know is engaged in some sin or self-destructive behavior? How is it loving not to help to guide one another closer to the power of God's grace and his mercy? How is it loving to refrain from challenging another because of fear we might offend him or her? I think back on my life, and there are so many instances where some have spoken up to me, family members and loved ones who have challenged me by exposing some lack of judgment or some behavior that I was engaged in. And I'm so grateful that they loved me enough to say something to me. And I think you and I need the courage to do the same. And that brings us to where we come here each weekend. Today's gospel ends with these words from the Lord: where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. He is here. He is here to help us and to strengthen us. The church teaches that Christ is present in four ways when we gather to celebrate the Holy Eucharist. First, in that way, referenced in our gospel, to the gathered assembly that was gathered in his name. But he's also present in the word that is proclaimed, which is that living action of God. He's also present in the person of the priest, configured to him in a special way by the virtue of the sacrament of holy orders. And he is here most powerfully and substantially in the Holy Eucharist when you and I receive him. And so he is here to fill us with his power and his strength so we can carry out that call that he gives us to love one another, even and maybe most especially when we need to speak up in warning or correction to another. But when we do that, let us do it in the freedom that our reading suggests for us, not concerned or consumed with how we will be treated or whether or not the other will heed our heartfelt recommendations, but always with the strength of knowing that when we do that, we have only done what the Lord has asked us to do, fulfilling that law that is meant to guide us in everything, loving our neighbor as ourselves.